Hello, my name is Bea. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to speak at the Practice Research in 21st Century Music Conference, especially on some of my favorite topics, composition and songwriting. The title of my presentation is Songwriting Inside Out, and a lot of the themes I will be discussing circle around the question, what artistic consequences may follow a collapse of the commercial product in songwriting? Before we get into all this, I will tell you a little bit about me. This is me waving. I am a practice researcher at Goldsmiths, and I have been a singer and songwriter within popular music for well over 10 years. Other identifiers that I wear somewhat interchangeably, like hats, are interdisciplinary musician, producer, writer, and artist. I am referencing Karin Knotzetine in saying that a stable name is not an expression or an indicator of stable thinghood, meaning that names such as musician, songwriter, producer, researcher, and artist remain, always, in some state of fluidity. I apply the same kind of flexible, movable, discovery-led approach to research. My work spans across many disciplines like performance, curation, filmmaking, opera, production, and cultural programming, as well as teaching. This all seeps into and shapes my research, which focuses on embodied practice, multimodality, and experimentation, with an emphasis on process and disruption in songwriting. The format of this presentation is a mixture of voiceover, text references, video documentation, and media examples. A collage, if you will, blending different modalities of how we might talk about process and songwriting. I will be referencing my ongoing project of generating process films, which turn songwriting inside out, to cleave a space for contemplating the tentative, the speculative, the fragmented, the flawed, and the repetitive. So, songwriting inside out, what does that mean? The idea, or experiment, is to expand the field of songwriting by placing the focus on artistic process. This is a deliberate emphasis on elements typically regarded as extrinsic to songwriting, and placing them right at the heart of attention. Life seeps into practice, and I believe practice doesn't happen in isolation. Embodiment, scale, slowness, and unfinishedness all form pillars of exploration. To contextualize my PhD, Songs as Process, collapsing the commercial product through embodiment, disrupts normative epistemologies of popular song in response to a dominant discourse that understands popular music as commercial product, the recording. My antidote, as previously hinted at, is a radical foregrounding of process and an active decentering of product. In popular music making, as framed in my research, the recording is artifact, albeit a very important artifact, and the practice is the work, ongoing, seeping, changeable, multidirectional, multimodal, and nonlinear. In other words, practice is process. Calling the prevalence of the commercial product into question, my investigations into songwriting process embrace practice as ultimately transdisciplinary, grounded in lived experience, multimodal experience, which calls for multimodal articulation. In my practice research, I am performing, reinstantiating, and documenting my own process, leaning on experimentation and repetition, drawing on filmmaking, installation, writing, and performance art, bringing these disciplines right into songwriting, where I imagine they reside anyway, and treating them as reciprocities. The dominant discourse that I referred to earlier, the one that frames popular music as commercial product, the recording, can be found in Agnes Guy-Raud's work. In Dialectic of Pop, she writes, "Not all recorded music is pop, but pop in all of its manifestations is essentially recorded music." Similarly, she states, "The completed pop work does not exist prior to its recording." Well, whilst I think that Dialectic of Pop is a fantastic book, as it really draws out pop's level of self-consciousness and its productive capacity for reflexivity, and it also argues how pop can welcome into its fold any music whatsoever and can complexify its meaning in multiple directions. I have to respectfully disagree with the sentiment that pop is essentially recorded music and that the completed pop work does not exist prior to its recording. What about the existence and significance of an unfinished pop work? Can a work ever be finished? Or rather, can a work ever be finished when the work might be the doing, the practice, perhaps a sense of movement? To some extent, there's an inherent question of value at hand here, so my research is an effort in leveling ontological hierarchies between instances of practice, as Mira Benjamin has put it before. I choose to value, experiment with, and learn from a whole range of instances of practice, and product isn't paramount. Instances of practice can occur across so many different circumstances, scales, directionalities, and shapes. Earlier, I called the recording artifact, a very important artifact to be exact, and I want to make clear that I adore the recording as artifact. Creating recordings is something I participate in and enjoy, so this is by no means a rejection of the recording, simply a rejection of it being considered the most defining element of a practice. To give an example, these are snippets of some of the tracks I have released as singles.
Run from all our promises. You echo in my head. Silence of all silences. Words are never said. Don't you know you're bitter blue? A deep red away. A lilac hue. Don't you know what blue can do? I am the storm now. A deja vu. You choose to wave it away. A disposable game. You shouldn't.
To me, these tracks capture a specific iteration of each song, but not their totality, which, should it even exist, exceeds the recording. Again, the recording is artifact, a record, a moment, or moments plural. I am wondering, can the song exist and change forever? I particularly like this quote by Derrida, which I think applies nicely to songwriting. The idea of the book, which always refers to a natural totality, is profoundly alien to the sense of writing. On an epistemological level, as well as a practical level, the preoccupation with a recording is immensely limiting and exclusionary. In basic terms, not everyone can or even wants to make a record. The practice, the experience of a song, of songwriting inside out, is different. It's more than the track. It's bigger and it's smaller. It's unpredictable. When we are fixated on the need to have something to show for our labors, we often deny our curiosities, Julia Cameron writes. To me, this rings very true for practice research. I encountered a real shift in my work and understanding of songwriting during the peak of lockdowns, as my material reality shifted back then, considering, for example, the isolation, the lack of studio access, or the lack of opportunities to play with other musicians. My perception changed. I was unable, without my collaborators, to produce the product I had been conditioned towards, preoccupied with, and it caused a real sense of distance that I felt towards my own practice. Focusing on process was a means of survival, a means of healing. Within this shift in focus, I didn't prioritize newness or completion in composition, but I prioritized the doing, the tinkering, meeting it, in whatever capacity, every day. Process over product, and I sure enough didn't deny my curiosities. It turned into a research experiment, which resulted in new articulations of techniques and afforded me a renewed closeness with my practice. Some of the corresponding documentation has been running in the background here. I agree with Christopher Small's simple but not simplistic concept of musicking, that music isn't a thing at all, that it is an activity, something that people do. In summer 2021, I designed a similar research experiment, this time resting the focus closely on unfinishedness. How does not finishing affect the process of making? I sang and played every day for almost 7 weeks, instantiating my songwriting practice for 30 minutes at a time and documenting this consistent return to process over product on video through voice notes, pictures, and personal reflections, building an auto-ethnographic account of practice. A set of process films emerged, and to further destabilize the presence of fixed media and welcome fluidity and multimodality, I showed these films of unfinished works in a live event, a multimedia performance installation as I called it, which is a rather long alternative to the word experiment, and continued the songwriting in front of an audience actively in dialogue with the films on show. This was captured on video also, and I will show an excerpt here.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
When I look at it now, one of the things that strike me is working in fragments, assembling, disassembling, stretching, breaking apart, combining, contemplating. It's a growing rhizome, it's making patterns. To me, this is deeply rooted in the creative process. Ben Spatz's work on embodiment is a vital reference, articulating technique, knowledge, and practice. They specify that knowledge inheres in practice, and that technique is knowledge that structures practice. Technique, in essence, can therefore be described as embodied knowledge, or a kaleidoscope of ways of doing things. Spatz also makes a case for rethinking embodiment as first affordance, which anchors my approach. The epistemic is in the world, not apart from it. It is how I know songwriting. This leads me back to interdisciplinarity, as the epistemic world, our lived experiences, can hardly be separated into neat, distinct, isolated categories. Embodied knowledge in songwriting reflects this, and may offer paths to expand the field. Songwriting welcomes into its fold, I am using Agnes Guy-Raud's eloquent phrasing here, a multitude of different modalities, silences, contemplations, frustrations, mistakes, the presence of other people, our participation in communities, collections of artistic influences, the impacts of physical spaces, cultural codes of behavior and performance, and the experience of your own physical body, its idiosyncrasies, well-being, and abilities. It also includes embodied knowledges of quote-unquote entirely different practices or activities we engage in our lives, like exercise, teaching, traveling, or cooking. I find that there is a cross-contamination and cross-pollination of creative disciplines within my own practice. Again, multimodal experience calls for multimodal articulation. Often my songwriting happens in dialogue with something, a reciprocal network. My work as a producer and filmmaker undoubtedly influences my music. For example, my short film Schiller Schiller, which pays homage to Bruce Conner's Crossroads, uses archival footage of the nuclear tests in Bikini Atoll in 1946. Music and voiceovers employ both an excerpt from Schiller's Ninth Letter on the Aesthetic Education of Man and a cover of Praise You, bending the meaning of the visuals through sound. I'll insert a clip here. What shapes my songwriting is tangled up in the tapestry of lived experience as it unfolds around me. The work might be patchworking techniques, like finding phrases, methods, motivation, and musicalities in an amalgamation of places. Songwriting inside out also lingers on how we meet the music. For me, this is often about reacquaintance and remembering. Sometimes this is rediscovering older projects and infusing them with the present. Other times it is a quote-unquote warm-up, paying attention to joy, playing other people's songs, breathing deeply, singing along to the music, blasting in the apartment and dancing around. When does musicking happen? Where? How? With whom? And on what scale? All these iterations are interesting to me. From humming a melody in the bathtub to collecting fragmented phrases in my everyday life. Practice research can make a habit to log these moments. Do you think that art is external and superior to real life, and that what the artist creates is on a transcendental plane? My answer is a simple no. There is an immense potential and richness in paying attention to the everyday. Attention really is the key here, as it shapes not only the foundations of practice research, but also offers methods of creative survival. Survival lies in sanity, and sanity lies in paying attention. The quality of life is in proportion, always, to the capacity for delight. The capacity for delight is the gift of paying attention. Consequently, attention and delight can also reframe many elements often considered extrinsic to songwriting. Noise, for instance. In Beyond Unwanted Sound, Noise, Affect, and Aesthetic Moralism, Marie Thompson details that noise should be understood not as antithetical to music, but as a crucial and inextinguishable component of musical materiality. Listening here has to be active. Likewise, through music, silence can be framed as one of its elements, as stated by Leon Botstein. In terms of composition process, silence, reflection, hesitation, they can all be a mode of doing, like a gap that pulls things toward itself. I would like to add that oftentimes the valuing of silences, noise, and tentative movements of making, playing, involve a certain degree of working with resistance. It's venturing towards a space of the unknown, a compelling and generative discomfort, like the continual movement of the research edge, as Ben Spatz has suggested. One of my upcoming projects explores performativity and liminality, and I will be performing, or rather songwriting live, in public spaces which aren't set up for performance. Returning to what artistic consequences may follow a collapse of the commercial product in songwriting, the answers are unmistakably manifold, yet highlighting, celebrating process may offer a profound expansion of the field of songwriting. Exploring it is an act of deboundarying a practice, blurring its peripheries and outputs, and establishing dialectical links, reciprocities, and implications rather than unrelated hierarchies, as proposed by Lefebvre. I would like to end with one of my favorite quotes. In a 1996 interview with Patti Smith, Thurston Moore asks her, "What is the future of rock?" "Sculpture," she responds. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat.